Amen. A few weeks ago, or it's probably a couple months ago now, time goes pretty quick these days. Thanks, Maria. A buddy of mine sent me a song. He's like, you're gonna love this song. I'm just gonna love it. I was like, all right. I don't really. There's not a lot of songs that I just super love. But send me a song, and you've probably not heard it, but you're gonna love it. It's called "Try Jesus." And so I get a text, and it's like a Spotify link or whatever, and it's like a song called "Try Jesus," and I was like, it's gonna be like, a worship song kind of thing or whatever. Everybody loves sending their pastor worship songs. This one's not. It is by a believer, but it goes like this. It says, "Try Jesus, not me, because I throw hands." It says, "Try Jesus, please don't try me, because I'll fight." He said, I know what he said about getting slapped, but if you touch me or mine, we're going to have scrap. So you can try Jesus, just don't try me. And I was like, yes. Yeah, isn't that good? You're like, that. I get it, man. Like, there's something in us is like, that's exactly right, all right? You go talk to him about that, but you come with my people, you come with me, I'm going to get you. Yesterday, Jessica had a slight altercation at the farmer's market, which is where hot, angry people go to buy vegetables. Like, I don't know why you do this. Just go to the grocery store, there's an air conditioner. I don't know why you go to farmers markets in general. But she's there, and there's like this whole thing, and like this little thing gets broken, and like there's this whole scene or whatever, and Jessica's like, somebody's being rude to my wife, and I'm in Huntsville, and I'm like, I'm about to drive down there and tell this farmers market person like a thing or two. Like there's something in you that's the way that we all, most of us react, even if you don't actually do it because you're like Southern or whatever, and you can't, but you want to. It's in there somewhere. That's who we are. Like that's something in us that loves that. We want to fight for us and ours. We may have heard what Jesus says about loving our enemies and stuff, and when it comes time to actually doing that, we're like, I don't know, I'm not actually going to do that. That's a real challenge. It's a real challenge for me. It's probably a real challenge for a lot of you. And so this passage we're going to get to this morning in Luke chapter 6, it's one that I struggle with personally. Like, I struggle with this one, like writing the sermon this week and walking this out and thinking this through what this actually means. This passage is a struggle for me because this is one, you want to take kind of figuratively. You want to sort of dance around it. When Jesus talks about turning the other cheek, right? You're like, let's kind of push that one to the side. I've never once seen this passage tattooed on anybody. It's not one of those. It's one of the reasons that we preach through books of the Bible here at Oaks is because you come to difficult passages that normally I might want to skip, and you have to deal with it. And so we've been walking through the book of Luke together, and this is where we are next, and it's an uncomfortable kind of passage. It's one that presses on me, and hopefully we'll press on you a little bit this morning as well. So last week, if you were here, Austin began walking us through what's known as the Sermon on the Plain, walked through the passage where Jesus pronounces some blessings and then some woes for those who are following him or not following him. And then right after that, Jesus presents us with this challenge. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 27, if you've got a copy of God's word. And this is how Jesus begins. He says this. He says, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who abuse you." He says the same thing 4 different ways. He starts out, he says, okay, love your enemies. And maybe you're hearing that for the first time. You're like, okay, yeah, maybe I can do that from a distance, figuratively, sort of, right? But then he stacks on the next part. He stacks on, do good to those who hate you. So you're like, all right, so does that mean I can't just say it? I actually have to do something about it? Yeah. Stacks onto that. He says, bless those who curse you. So it doesn't just mean I can just do it. I can go through the motions. I actually have to mean it. Yeah. And he stacks on, and you got to pray for those who abuse you. So it's not something I can just rush through. I can make it happen in a moment, like schedule it and be done with it and move on. I've got to continue praying for these people like that. Like, are you kidding me? That's a lot. And the people standing there that day had to understand that. Like, come on, really? Then when you're standing there talking to Jesus in this time, like these people had real enemies. They had real oppression. Like their lives are actually, they're in Roman occupied territory. They have very real enemies. They're facing actual hatred, actual abuse, actual oppression. And so what Jesus is calling these people to do is honestly pretty staggering. And for these people that he's saying it to in this time, it is no less difficult than what he's calling you and me to do? Probably a whole lot more difficult, honestly. So if he means this for them, he's got to mean it for me. And it's just a straight up command. So it means I've got to figure out what I'm going to do with it. Jesus goes on from there, he starts explaining exactly what he means. So in 29, he says, to the one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other one also. And from one who takes away your cloak, don't withhold your tunic either. That's like your outer garment, your inner garment. It says, give to everyone who begs from you. And from one who takes away your goods, don't demand them back. And 31 says, as you wish that others would do to you, so do to them. Now, listen, what I think probably happens most of the time is that people will read this kind of stuff, like this passage and passages like it, we'll read it quickly. We don't think too deeply about it, and you sort of get the overarching idea a little bit, and you kind of reinterpret it down in your own language. And if you're not careful, you can come away with a really common misunderstanding or misconception of what the gospel is, of what Jesus calls us to do. And it's a misconception, honestly, that specifically I think is really difficult for men. Because if you're not careful, what you end up doing is you reconstrue the gospel, you boil down just a quick reading of this without thinking too hardly into it, and you boil it down to two words that Jesus is calling you to do. Be weak. You read this passage sometimes, if you're not careful, you don't think deeply about it, you come away with what Jesus, I think the general idea of what Jesus wants from his followers is just to be weak. Can't you see how you could get that? If you're not thinking carefully about it, like the one who strikes you in the cheek, offer the other one also. One who takes away your cloak, don't withhold your tunic either. It sounds like Jesus is saying, just be weak, let yourself get run over, and that's what I'm telling you to do. For a lot of us, that doesn't fit well with how we're built. No, it doesn't fit well with how our culture tells us to live, and so that's a difficult thing to swallow. Is that what Jesus is calling us to do? Just be weak. Get run over. Never stand up. Be quiet. Be nice. Yeah, you tell kids all the time to be nice. Is that what Jesus wants from us? Just to be nice, sweet little people sitting in the background, never making a stir? Well, it didn't sound like him. I think a lot of people, we grow up sometimes with this kind of moralized, like do good, hold out misconstruction of Jesus. And we come away with this idea that Christianity, it tells us to be weak, to be quiet, and to be nice. And that's the biggest goal of it. Essentially, that Christianity is a thing that exists to tell you to behave yourself. And you don't want to. And so you end up rejecting a misconstruction of what Jesus says. You end up rejecting like your version or a shadow of what the gospel really is, and missing the strength of it. Is Jesus telling his followers to be quiet, nice, weak people? No. Is he telling them to not make a scene, to let people walk all over you and just be sweet, be quiet, and bless their little hearts? Is that what he's telling them? No. Jesus is challenging something really deep in us here. Like he's challenging like something that gets at the core of us. And it is a challenge, but the challenge is not to be weak. So when Jesus said his followers would do what he did, he wasn't kidding, all right? And so when he's getting into here, he's going to challenge our pride. It's going to challenge our self-importance. Because Jesus set the example of us giving up our pride, of giving up our self-importance. He's challenging that weak part of us that feels like it needs to stand up and assert itself in moments when it really doesn't. Let's look again closely at what he says. Let's break this apart. So verse 27, he says, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Now, the begin part, that's the word it's the word that comes from agape. All right, and so maybe you've heard about the word agape before. It's not the love that you have for your family. It's not the love that you have for your spouse. It's the love that God has for us. So when he says to love your enemies, he's saying to agape your enemies. It's to love your enemies with the same love that God has loved you with. And that if you think about that, if you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the way that God loves you, you could associate that with the way that culture in our world, in our like normal, day-to-day life, we talk about the word love, which is not the idea at all here. All right. This is a command. So like I'm going to go grammar on you. All right. So remember like 10th grade grammar, this is a plural, present, active, imperative verb. And some of you in the room just got really happy I said that. And the rest of you have no idea what I'm talking about, all right? I'm in the camp that doesn't know what I'm talking about exactly, but I'll tell you, I'll fill you in. What that means is this is a command that is intended to have ongoing action. This isn't a one-time thing. This is an as-you-go thing. As the way you're living your life, you've got to be agapeing your enemies. Those who curse you, those who walk over you, those who are like those like you're agapeing them on an ongoing, continual basis. Whatever it means, you're supposed to be loving them the way that God loves you. So think about this. Like Jesus is commanding you to do something here. He's commanding you to do something. He's commanding you to love. Now, okay, that's interesting because like normally we don't think of love as a thing to be commanded. We think of love as a thing to be felt, right? So in our normal conversations, in our normal day-to-day life, like this kind of messes with our common understanding of what love actually is. It messes with our cultural understanding of what love is because we love all sorts of stuff, right? We love pizza. Like I had some pizza the other day from that like Tuscan NY. I don't know how to say that restaurant's name, but that mess was good. Like I don't know what that guy's doing over there, but you should go buy one of his pizzas before it goes out of business because nobody's there. But you should go. Like, it's great. All right, so I love that dude's pizza. It was great. It was fantastic. We talk about falling in love. Like you just like tripped and fell into it like a puddle, right? Just got it all over you. Like, just kind of happened, you know? You can fall back out of love. It just stops one day. You're like, well, what do you want from me? Fell out of love with you. Bye. I mean, that's the way that we use that word. It's a passive thing. It's not an imperative. It's passive. It's something that happens to us. It's a thing that we feel and then we stop feeling. Well, I can't command you to be sad. I can try. It just doesn't work, right? I can't make you feel that. Like if you're sitting there sleepy and tired, I can't command you to like, be excited, you know, and you're like, I'm just scared now. I mean, I can't command a response from you like that. So if love is a thing that happens to us, the thing that we feel, then Jesus has no justification for commanding you to do it in an ongoing and continual way. So he can't be talking about a thing you feel for your enemies, which is a relief because I feel some things. You know what I'm saying? And so he's not talking about how I feel about them. He's talking about what I do. He isn't commanding us to feel a certain way about people. He's calling us to a choice. He's using a word that describes God's action towards us. Like the demonstrated, like walked out love of God for us. He's calling us to imitate God's action towards us, which was loving, self-sacrificing, and seeking our good. It was a love on God's part that transcended emotion. Like God didn't do what he did for you because he felt something. Might feel some things, but he did it because he chose to. He did it because he wanted to. He did it because it's in his nature. He didn't feel some stuff towards you. He did some things for you. It's a love that God intentionally engaged in. Jesus didn't like accidentally trip and fall out of heaven and come down across for you. Like he intentionally, willfully did that. And so in the same way, Jesus is calling us to intentionally and willfully do some things. Not just for one another and like in our church family and not just for your friends and the people that you're close to, but for the people that are actively opposed to you. Which is interesting because we were those people for him. I was the one, like you were the one who was actively opposed to him. Like I was living my life in a way that was actively opposed to God, whose nature, and like I was living my way in opposition to him. I was living as an enemy of God before I came to trust Christ as my Savior. If you don't believe me, look at Romans 5:8. It says this, but God shows his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since therefore we've now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God? Saying, I earned wrath and I'm saved by him from it. It says this in verse 10, for if while we were still enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his son, how much more now that we're reconciled shall we be saved by his life? Listen, God looked on me and you, living in opposition to him, like living as enemies, and he chose to love us in an actional way by leaving heaven, coming to earth, dying on a cross for me, taking my sin on himself, paying for my price, raising from the dead to give me new life, and offering all of that as a gift to me despite me. He agaped me. He actively did something by choice to seek my good. And so when this passage comes and says, love your enemies, it's not talking about how you feel about them, all right? Honestly, it's talking about choosing to act some ways despite how you might feel about them. to do some things practically, actively engaged, where you're doing something to seek the good of people that are actively opposed to you in the same way that God actively sought your good as you are actively opposed to him. Does that reframe this whole feeling of love your enemies a little bit? And you're like, I don't like my enemies at all. And he's like, I don't care. Sometimes you're pretty annoying too, right? I don't know if that's how God feels about me, but if he did, it'd be fair, right? It'd be fair. So God looked upon me and you, living in opposition to him, and he chose to love us, chose to agape us, chose to seek our good, despite my disregard, despite my sin, despite my hatefulness towards him. So he's not calling us to do anything new here. He's not calling us to do anything that's really that different from what he did. He's just saying, you got to do the exact same thing that I did for you. If you're following me, you're going to do what I do. And what I did was lay my life down for people who are actively opposed to me. My followers will do the same. So specifically, what are we supposed to do then? If that's what this means, it's something we're supposed to do, it's not something we're supposed to feel, then what are we supposed to do? So first, this is the way I framed it. We choose to seek good instead of seek payback. All right? That's the best way I think I can frame up a lot of this passage. We seek to do good instead of payback. I love some good payback, don't you? I love movies named Payback. I love themes of payback. I'm in, man. It just it feels right. Eye for an eye. I'm okay with that. The other day, a couple years ago, no parent in here wants your kid to be messed with, And I always wondered, because I'm a little confrontational. And so I always wondered, what's going to happen the first time my kid gets messed with by another kid? How am I going to handle that exactly? I made it to the first day of kindergarten before I got to find out. We got one day in, all right? Ezra comes back from kindergarten, day one. That's my middle kid. Middle kids, they get, they're not usually the most trouble, in general. And so he comes in from kindergarten. I'm like, hey, dude, how was your day? What's going on? Tell me about it. And he's like, it was great. It was good. It's good. Okay. Good story. I'm pushing a little bit more. I'm like, well, did anything really good happen? He's had some stuff. I was like, okay, well, did anything bad happen? Anything upset you or anything? Just, checking. And he's like, yeah, there was some stuff. I was like, oh, okay. Well, what happened? He's like, well, there was some mean kids in the playground. I was like, oh, okay, all right. I'm already getting hot. I'm already like, okay, what are their names? What are their parents' names? Where do they live? Did you get their email addresses? And he's like, well, yeah, some mean kids in the playground. I was like, well, were they in your class? And he's no, they're big kids, third graders. I was like, oh, shoot. You got big kids messing with little kids now. Now we're all mad, aren't we? And he's like, all right, what'd they do? And he's like, well, they were messing with me and my crew. I was like, where'd you get a crew from? It's the first day of kindergarten, He's like, I got a crew. Well, what are their names? Like, I don't care. I don't know. It's a crew. We just roll together, So the third graders messing with my crew. I was like, what were they doing? Well, saying mean things. And then they climbed up the slide and they wouldn't let us go down. I was like, oh, all right. It's big. It's big when you're in kindergarten, You want to go down the slide and they got all these big kids in there saying mean stuff to you. They want you to go down the slide. And I was like, all right, well, did you go tell a teacher? No. I was like, buddy, you got to go tell the teachers. That's why I got the teachers out there. They're supposed to help you with the situations. You got to go tell the teachers, And I'm talking about teachers, and he goes, I didn't need to. Oh. Why didn't you need to? I just punched one of them in the head. And they all ran off and messed with us no more. I was like, yes. I'm like, I was so excited. I couldn't say that. I can tell you that because he's not in here, right? I was so excited. Just jacked a dude in the head in the slide. He's like, wham, Kid goes down the slide, passed out cold, I don't know. And Ezra and his crew go about their day. And we're all like, good for you, buddy, right? Good for you. Oh, Lord, let me come back to our passage. We choose to seek good instead of payback. That is just not natural to us. But Jesus calls us to do something much higher and much harder here. He says, to one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other one also. And from the one who takes away your cloak, don't withhold your tunic either. We're called to seek good, not payback. So it's not letting people walk over you. It's staying engaged with a relationship with somebody else so you can continue to seek good instead of just crush them. You can continue to seek their good over the long term instead of shut it down, crush them, be done with them. This isn't weakness. This is control. This is strength under control. This isn't something that requires weakness of me and you. This is something that requires strength. This is God choosing not to destroy Israel in the desert when they repeatedly questioned him, when they repeatedly disobeyed him, they made idols, like they're doing all this insanity, and God is controlling his strength by not paying them back, not giving them what they deserved. God could have retaliated. Would have been fair to retaliate. It would have made sense to me. But God, in his love, he chose to seek their good instead of payback. Choosing to retaliate doesn't take a lot of strength. Choosing to retaliate just means me being myself and my flesh and my sinfulness, seeking my self-exaltation, right? And giving somebody else what they deserve. Jesus isn't calling me to that. All right, so what does this mean? Does this mean that you have to be fully trusting of these people? Sometimes I get that question about this passage. So people that have hurt me, people that have done these awful things to me, does that mean I'm supposed to just trust them and forget about it and move on like nothing ever happened? No, that's not wise at all. We still exercise wisdom. We're just staying engaged enough to seek their good in whatever way is appropriate for that. That doesn't mean that the things that they've done don't carry weight. The things that I've done before the Lord, they carry weight. So does that mean I'm just supposed to fully just forget about it, trust these people like nothing ever happened? No, that's lying. That's not authentic at all. Does it mean that I should intentionally put myself in harm's way? And repeatedly and consistently, put myself in harm's way because I'm supposed to turn the other cheek? No, that's not what he's asking you to do here. He's encouraging you to seek their good, not payback. Does not mean continually put yourself in harm's way. That's not wise either. Maybe there's some situations where somebody's being a jerk or whatever, and yeah, you want to try to love them and continue to engage in that. But there's going to be other situations that all of us can imagine where there's staying in those situations is not about this passage. That's a different thing entirely. He's not asking you to stay in those spaces. He's asking you to seek their good. And in a lot of situations, that seeking their good is going to take a form of prayer. It's going to take a form of concern. It's not going to be something where you're actively subjecting yourself to some kind of form of abuse. That's not what he's asking you to do here. Does it mean avoiding conflict? Is that what it means to seek people's good? I don't know if you know me very well, but you can probably guess. No. Loving people well does not mean avoiding conflict. In a lot of ways, I think loving people well means stepping into conflict in a loving and respectful and God-honoring way. I think that's some of the most loving things you can do for one another, for each other, for people in our world. I don't think it's loving to allow people to continue to walk in sin. I don't think it's loving to continue people to ruin their life and ruin their eternity, to continue to walk with a misconception of the gospel, to continue to walk without hope. And because we don't want to be uncomfortable and accidentally have any form of conflict, we just refuse to speak up and let them walk towards destruction because we don't want to cause a stir. I don't think that's loving. I think that's fearful. So does loving our enemies mean avoiding conflict with them? Needless, yeah. Unnecessary and in ways that don't honor God, yeah. But there's a lot of conflict that needs to happen, like respectful, good, healthy conflict with people around us. Not that's angry, not that's explosive, but that's respectful and loving. We have to be people that speak up. It is not loving to abandon our friends and our neighbors across our city and across our campus and around the world to a lie. That's not loving. So we step in and we speak up in the love of Christ in the same way that Christ did. Are there some wrongs that have been leveled against you at farmers markets and playgrounds around the world? Have you got some wrongs that have been leveled against you? Of course you do. And so we come to this passage and you don't have to dig real deep to come up with these things, do you? I don't have to. And what do we do with these? The call here is high. The command is hard. The invitation, the command is to seek good and not pay back for the people that are around you. And so I've had to think all week, what's that going to mean for me? Because I'm not great at this. So in situations that I'm already in, the situations that are going to come up, like in the situations in your life that have been happening, the ones that are coming in the days ahead, what is this going to look like for you to love your enemies, to seek their good and not pay back? The second thing Jesus starts talking about, he starts talking about generosity. In verse 30, he calls us to choose to be generous. He says, give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, don't demand them back. Okay, so is this some kind of arbitrary and unwise, like just giving things away to lazy people for fun? Like, is that what Jesus is asking you to do? Like, there's not any strategy to this. There's like just give everything away to lazy people. Like, no, that's not what he's doing. Elsewhere in Scripture, we're called to be good stewards of the resources that God's given us. But Jesus is calling us to take a posture of giving rather than keeping. All right, just think about that. All right, he's asking you to take a posture of giving rather than keeping, of exalting yourself, of storing up for yourself, but a willingness to be generous in the same ways that Christ was generous. Those of us who are members of Oaks, our church covenant talks about being generous in the same way that Christ was generous with us. That means we bring our time and our energy, brings our resources, like our tithes, like we're giving significantly for the good of the people around us. It's a posture of giving rather than a posture of keeping. And that can mean a lot of things for you. I don't know exactly what that means specifically for you. I know some ideas for me, but I know one for a lot of us is that in a few days' time, our city's going to change dramatically. You're not going to be able to drive down 15th Street ever again. You know, you don't need to go anywhere near Target. Target's going to be dead to you, right? 40,000 people are going to descend on our city, and they're going to need some stuff from us. They're going to need some time. They're going to need some energy. They're going to need some wisdom. They're going to need some community. They're going to need some truth. They're going to need some discipleship. And it's going to cost us some stuff. It's going to cost us our energy. It's going to cost us our comfortableness. It's going to cost us our quick and easy Target trips. It's going to cost us some things to be able to take a posture of generosity with the campus. So those of you who are college students in Tuscaloosa right now, man, we love you. We believe in you. And we wanted to plant a church in a college town intentionally because we believe in the strategic nature of the campus. But there's a lot of you, and you're nuts. And we love it. It's great, right? But it's a lot easier as a church to be like, you know what? We're going to move as far away from the campus as we possibly can, but still in the right area where we live. And we're going to isolate from the campus, and we're going to hang out with us and our people, and we're going to let somebody else figure out what to do with those 40,000 people. And we've committed as a church not to be those people. We've committed as a church to take a posture of generosity with the campus and say, we're going to leverage our lives and our resources and our time and our nights and our texts at 11:14 p.m. for some reason. I don't want people to text me loudly. We're gonna step in and be in those spaces so that we can have an impact for the kingdom, where we can engage with people who are in a season of life where they're figuring out who they're going to be for the rest of their lives and trying to figure out if they're going to follow God and what that's going to look like, and then how they can have a kingdom impact for generations. We decided we're going to be people who pay the price to step in and disciple and love a campus well as our city. That costs us some stuff. Sometimes I meet people in Tuscaloosa. Sometimes I meet lifers in Tuscaloosa. They're real grumpy about the campus, and they're like, man, there's just so many people and all this stuff. And I'm like, your city wouldn't be here without that campus, right? There's that. I don't know what else you would do if you live in Tuscaloosa. I can't imagine you not loving and caring for the campus well. It seems like if God placed you in this town, he placed you here with a stream of people where 10,000 people a year are going to move here, 10,000 people a year are going to be sent from here. And if we can be a gospel-centric outpost, helping to seek the people who don't yet know the Lord, help them move towards maturity in Christ where they can follow him well and send them out to change the world, we can get some stuff done. And so that's who we are. That's why we love the campus. It's not exclusively for the campus, but it's a church that loves the campus. It's going to cost you some stuff. Thankfully, Christ set a pretty solid example of loving generously people who couldn't really love him back. That's me. That's you. And Christ took a posture of generosity, not a posture of keeping. Didn't consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but gave himself up. He's asking us to do the same thing. Christ generously offered us everything. And so we give our all for those around us. Those people in our workplaces, those people on our streets, those people in our city, those people on our campus, and people around the world, expecting nothing in return. The obvious question in this passage is just why? All right? You can read the commands of Christ, but until you figure out that they matter, why they would matter to you, it doesn't really carry any weight. Okay? And so we got to get why. So Jesus adds a logical explanation in verse 32. He says this. He says, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same thing. And if you lend to those who lend from you and expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. He's saying, listen, the world loves in a way that is mutually beneficial. Okay? Is that fair? In general, when we talk about love and like engaging in a loving relationship, normally that relationship is intended to be mutually beneficial and will remain in those relationships of that kind as long as they are mutually beneficial. But the moment that they're not, we're told we can bail. Like if you have a friend, right, and that friend is loving you and supporting you well, that means they're a good friend. But the moment they stop spending enough time with you and stop supporting you well enough, you need to go get better friends because you deserve it, right? They're not a good friend. They're not loving you well. It's not mutually beneficial anymore, so you get to bail. Well, the same thing starts getting applied to spouses, where your spouse is supposed to complete you and support you and love you, and when they fall short on some of those things, you need to go get you a better spouse. Happens with churches. Like when your church, your small group, like you were gone for 4 weeks and didn't tell anybody, didn't say nothing, and your small group didn't text you for 4 weeks because they didn't realize you were gone or whatever. Nobody said anything to you. Well, they're not reaching out to me. I need to go find a better church that will serve me better. A lot of what we're told to do in all our relationships in normal culture are built upon this concept of mutually beneficial love. That's not what he just talked about. What he just said was, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For everybody does that. What's that? How does that say you're living any different? Like if you're trying to follow Jesus and that's all we're doing is just loving people that love us well, and then when they stop loving us well, we bail. Like, if that's the highest aim that we have on this, like, how are we any different than the rest of the world? The world tells you to love well as long as you're loved well, and Jesus is just not impressed with that. I'm gonna say that again. The world tells you to love well as long as you're loved well. And Jesus just isn't very impressed. There's a higher call that we're being called to. There is a more sacrificial call, a call that requires a lot more strength than that. And that's what he's calling you into. And he closes with a promise in verse 35. He says, but love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you'll be sons of the Most High. For he's kind to the ungrateful and the evil. So be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. When it says that you'll be sons of the Most High, that doesn't mean that you'll make it, right? If you'll just love your enemies and do this stuff, then you'll make it across the line and you get to be saved or something. That's not it. He's saying you're demonstrating, you're showing evidence of the fact that you're a son of the Lord. You're a son of the King. You're a son of Jesus. Like you're a child of God because you're seeing change. It's not doesn't make you a Christian. It's evidence of your faith. It comes with a promise that in the Lord, our reward will be great. This kind of stuff doesn't pay dividends on earth. It's hard. It's a high bar. It's costly and it's sacrificial. And it's what he's called us into. So this is a gut check passage for me because of the phrase at the end. Like, I'll do this and you'll be sons of the Most High God. Loving your enemies doesn't save you. Loving your enemies shows that he's saved you. So this week, I'm committing to you right here in front of you. Like, I'm committing to try to walk this out, to seek the good of the people around me. Generous to a fault. I'm going to be trying to engage in good and helpful forms of conflict that make me a little bit uncomfortable, but I know it'll be helpful for the people around me. I'm going to try to skip the selfish kind of conflict every chance I get. What about you? Are there some specific relationships, some specific spaces that this passage is poking at you on? So in those settings, in those places, in those relationships, what does it look like for you to love your enemies, to agape your enemies, actively and with strength to love the people around you? What's that look like for you? Some of you, man, you're here this morning, and maybe you're here and you're in your heart of hearts, you have no motivation to do this. Like this whole being a child of God thing, like you're not motivated by that yet. That's not who you are. And I just want you to hear, like this, I understand like this makes no sense to you. But this is a good indicator that the gospel hasn't clicked for you yet. And so if you're sitting there, maybe you've been around church for a while, but this still doesn't make any sense to you why you would possibly do this, that's a good indicator the gospel hasn't clicked for you. Because what the gospel is that you lived as an enemy of God, you walked in sin, you went your own way, and you separated yourself from him. But God in love was willing to offer himself for you and has invited you to do that same thing for other people. And so Jesus left heaven, died on a cross to pay for your sin, to give everything for you, then rose from the grave, defeated even death for you, to offer you a new life, offered all of that as a gift. And if you would just say yes to that gift, you'd be saved, set free. It wasn't because of anything you did. And the people around you, we love because, not because of what they did anything, because of what he did in us. That's the gospel. If you haven't got to a point where that's clicked for you, that you were the enemy of God, you're the one that needs rescue, today can be that day. That's what our church is built upon, helping people come to figure this out, to know the gospel, to know Jesus, to be saved by him, and then go back out into our city and our campus in the world to let people know the hope and the joy that we found in him. Our band's going to come. They're going to lead us in a time of response, and I just want to give you just a moment to think that through. All right, so if you just want to take a posture of prayer, just bow your head, close your eyes just for a moment. Just be there just for a moment in your space. I just want you to get to think. I know sometimes when I'm sitting up here talking and people are moving around, it's just hard to think. And so if you're a believer in the room, if you're a Christian in the room, I just want to give you a moment to think on what this would look like. Some of you got some like real hurt stuff. And figuring out how to actually love those people well is going to be really challenging. It's going to take some wisdom, and maybe some wisdom beyond you. And so maybe you want to talk with somebody about that. Maybe you want to talk with one of us. Our prayer team is going to be in the back. They'd love to just talk with you about what that looks like and how you can love some people around you that are just really hard to love. They'd love to talk with you about that. They've been through that too. Some of you in the room you're not Christians yet. The gospel hasn't clicked for you, and you've got some questions. And some of you just been a little bit too afraid to ask anybody. So again, our prayer team's back there. I'm going to be up here. I'm going to be hanging around afterwards. Ask the questions on your heart. Don't walk out with those question marks hanging there. Ask somebody. So I want you to pray. Pray through what next steps look like for you. And then when you're ready, our band's going to lead us. Let me pray for you. Father, my plea is that you would help us to so internalize what Christ did for us, that we would in turn do that for those around us. I pray that you'd give us the strength to love even our enemies, the way you loved your enemies, the way you loved me. And I pray for my friends in the room who haven't come to trust you yet, that they'd ask the questions on their heart. They'd find hope and find truth. Amen. You take a moment and pray, and then also lead us.